Okay. Well, we really appreciate you sitting down with us for the foundation and talking about your career and your lives here in Lancaster and Fairfield County. Very, very appreciative of that so much. Um, Dr. Payne, let's start with you, and thanks for being with us, Cheryl, too. That's great. Tell us a little bit about your personal background, the early days, family, mom and father, and brothers and sisters.
Well, I've had an interesting childhood. I was actually born because my dad was in the Navy, World War II, born in Massachusetts. And we moved around from Massachusetts to Texas. But I actually grew up in Chillicothe. When I was in the first grade, we moved to Chillicothe because my dad went in business with a friend and built a drive-in movie theater called the Moonlight. And my life now has been associated mostly with drive-in movie theaters. After I was born, my dad and mom had 7 other children. I'm the oldest of 8, and I know my dad always said one of us was planned, but the rest of them were surprises, and he would not tell any of us who was the planned person. We moved from the city to a small country farm, 100 acres, a farm that I describe as a 4-H farm. We had 50 acres woods, 50 acres tillable pasture, and we raised cows and calves. We always had a couple pigs, and we always had either ponies or horses. And I was very active during high school in the 4-H. And I attribute a lot of my my well-being actually to the 4-H. I learned how to run a business meeting. I learned how to keep track of personal finances because I took a personal finance course in 4-H for 2 or 3 years. I learned about tractors and mechanics and learned that I was not mechanically adept. So that field was crossed out as far as my profession. I also took woodworking and learned I wasn't very adept at woodworking either. I couldn't even build a birdhouse. But I was successful in showing my calves and actually in business, the business part of it. I also started working in the drive-ins. By the 6th grade, my dad had built a second drive-in, and we would all start out mowing the grass, and then we advanced up through the ranks to popping popcorn, serving Coca-Colas, and during the night and during the day we'd be cleaning the restrooms and making sure the whole facility was clean and well prepared for our customers at night. And then later on I managed the concession stand, took care of the finances. My dad and mom both went to Wilmington College. Dad graduated and he was a school teacher. So during the school season, he taught school. He not only taught school, he also drove a school bus, and he coached some. So he was very busy during the school season, and during the summer times we ran the drive-ins. But it was instilled upon each of us by my dad and mom that college was a given. And when I got to my senior year, deciding on where to go to college, going to travel around, look at different schools. My dad and mom, we sat down one evening and said, we don't have the money to send you to college. You're going to have to pay for this yourself. And our suggestion is go to the branch, stay at home, and that's how it worked out. I went to the branch for a year and a half, transferred down to campus, High University, finished my undergraduate work, and then went to a University of Cincinnati Medical School. While I was in college, my junior year was when I started having trouble walking, had trouble with my balance. The doctors thought I had a brain tumor. I was worked up at Ohio State. And when I was discharged, they told me I had a vitamin imbalance and I should take vitamins. But they told my parents that I had MS, multiple sclerosis. And their advice was to my parents they left it up to them to tell me to drop out of school and not continue with the idea of going to medical school. But my folks never told me that. We're not going to tell him that. So I just kept on doing what I was doing. I sort of stumbled a little bit, was accepted into medical school, and it wasn't until I was a freshman in medical school when I actually was told the diagnosis by the physicians down in Cincinnati when we had our physical exam as freshmen. And I mean, they told me the diagnosis, and that was pretty much that. I continued on thinking about my future at that time, and I excluded some of the professions that would require a lot of standing and walking because I was having trouble standing. So that excluded surgery, OB, things like that. I did rotate through Children's Hospital. That excluded pediatrics for me because I didn't know exactly what profession to get into, but then I sort of liked radiology. And at the University of Cincinnati, they had a professor that was world-renowned in radiology. He had written several textbooks, and he was just a very personable guy. And so after my internship, I applied to UC, and I became a resident in radiology with this professor, and we sort of clicked. And as it turns out, he had some individuals, and he had some good friends in on the board of the Multiple Sclerosis Society. And he connected me with them, and he was able to get funding for my residency through the Multiple Sclerosis Society. And as a result of that connection, I also became a volunteer with the MS Society, starting back in 1968. That's when I first got connected with them.
Getting back to when you first heard the diagnosis, you were a freshman or in medical school?
Yes.
At that time? What was going through your mind other than trying to pick out a specialty that you thought that you'd be able to tackle and thrive in?
Actually, I was glad I finally had a diagnosis, because then you know you're not just dreaming what's going on. And I did not know anything about the disease itself. I was glad I didn't have a brain tumor, but I did. And at that time, we did not have the internet, so I did look up different references and looked up the diagnosis. And I always put that on the back burner. I never thought much about it, to tell you the truth. I just went on and did what I could as the best I could, and that's how I kept going.
Yeah. And maybe some of that came from your 4-H and being around parents that were pretty active and pretty busy and involved in things.
I think so, and it also came from our lifestyles. We like I say, we lived on a farm. Everything's sort of matter of fact. We were always my parents especially were very competitive. I'm not quite as competitive as they are, but we were expected. I even thinking about high school and college, I won several awards, but when you would win something, it was just like, so you won another award. That's what they expect you to do. I was president of my class in high school. I won several 4-H awards. I went to 4-H Congress. I went to Buckeye Boys State. Just different things that
Sure, yeah.
It was just a matter of fact. That's how you do it, and that's what you do.
What was the name of the professor at Cincinnati?
His name was Benjamin Felsen, and he has, of course, since passed away. But and that was my connection to Lancaster.
Well, I heard that name before from Dr. Welsh.
Yes, see, Dr. Welsh and Dr. Jones were radiologists here in Lancaster while I was a resident, and they both trained under Dr. Felsen. And during my vacations as a resident, I would do what's called a locums and cover the practice of other radiologists. I covered the one in Cambridge, and I covered a couple in Cincinnati, and then I found out that there was one here in Lancaster that they needed coverage for in 1970. Actually, it was 70 and 71 both. When either Dr. Welsh or Dr. Jones would go on vacation, I would come up and spend the week here in Lancaster. And I had an opportunity to not only stay in the Holiday Inn, but I also was able to stay in this magnificent house that Dr. Welsh has on Wheeling. And that house, I remember Cheryl and I were there, that house is so big that one of his sons was there for 3 days and we didn't even know it. So, and I stayed in Dr. Jones' house, which was on Sycamore Drive, and that house actually, after I moved to Lancaster a few years later, I actually bought that house and we moved in there.
Ah, okay.
And we lived there as our house.
Yeah. So you, getting back to school now, getting through school, what was that, were things pretty easy for you? Did you have to study a lot?
No, school was never easy for me. I always had to study a lot. And I know there are some individuals that it would come easy and they didn't seem to have to study as much as I did. But I always had to study a lot. I did that at High University. I did not have to work during the school year. I was able to make enough money in the summer to pay for my room and board and tuition in the winter. So that worked out very well. And same way with medical school, it was not easy. I studied a lot. And it's interesting that each year I would think this is almost as much as I can possibly do, but then the next year was always harder for some reason. But you just get through it. You just get by.
So it was in school that you decided radiology would probably be a great way to go?
It was about my sophomore year in school. One of my friends in high school's mother worked for a radiologist. So actually I knew what a radiologist was. Some of the other professions, because nobody in my family is in the medical field. Everything is new to me. And so that's when like I say, from my high school friend, I learned about the radiologist, and I sort of knew what type of work they did, and it was just sort of a natural for me. While I was in medical school, I did what's called an externship. I went to Youngstown for one of these semesters and worked with the radiologist in the radiology department, learning more about radiology, and this was my junior year. So it just sort of a natural progression as to what I could do, and what I enjoyed.
What was it that drew you to radiology?
I don't know. I think it was the fact that you can, at that time it was all